Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to reevaluate endpoint security strategies in the wake of the historic 2024 outage. Now, if you're a business decision maker or an IT leader, you know exactly what event I'm talking about, right? So today, we're looking closely at a comprehensive 2026 guide from Atlant Security to really understand the lessons learned and to see exactly how the top endpoint detection and response, or EDR platforms, stack up right now.
To give you a clear, practical roadmap today, we'll be covering 6 key areas: the catalyst, drivers for EDR change, comparing top EDR contenders, selection and evaluation criteria, the real security lesson, and finally, planning a safe migration.
All right, Section 1, the catalyst, the July 2024 outage. Let's just briefly ground ourselves in exactly why this conversation is happening and why the entire cybersecurity industry just had a massive wake-up call.
8.5 million. That is the staggering number of Windows devices that were completely paralyzed globally on July 19, 2024, by a defective CrowdStrike Falcon content update. I mean, we are talking about grounded airlines, paralyzed hospitals, disrupted emergency services. The estimated economic impact of all this? A massive $5 billion.
So how exactly does a simple update cause that much chaos? Well, let's translate some of the technical jargon. The faulty update contained a logic error. And because the Falcon sensor operates at ring 0, which is the absolute deepest, most critical layer of your operating system, the resulting crash was completely unrecoverable on its own. It literally required a technician to physically or remotely reboot every single affected machine into safe mode just to delete the bad file.
Moving to Section 2, drivers for EDR change, beyond the outage. While that crash is definitely the primary catalyst here, let's look at how this builds into several other strategic reasons organizations are looking for alternatives today.
Look, it's not just about the outage itself. Leaders like you are looking at concentration risk, like what actually happens when one vendor controls the kernel across your entire fleet. They're also looking at high per-seat costs at scale, lingering concerns about that kernel-level architecture, coverage gaps that are starting to trigger insurer scrutiny, and honestly, just the sheer complexity of managing such a massive platform, especially if you don't have a dedicated security ops team to run it.
Now, to be totally fair here, CrowdStrike objectively remains technically phenomenal. They still have some of the strongest detection telemetry and threat intelligence in the entire industry. But competitors are closing the gap for sure. Modern alternatives are really stepping up by offering more flexible pricing models, lower total cost of ownership at scale, better cloud workload protection, and deeper native integrations for your CM.
Which brings us to Section 3, comparing top EDR contenders. Who are the players? If you're seriously considering a switch, you need to know who the heavy hitters are. Let's do a head-to-head comparison of the leading contenders.
Let's break this down. First, SentinelOne. They offer incredible autonomous AI features and a really cool ransomware rollback. But remember, they also use a kernel-level driver. Then you've got Microsoft Defender. Honestly, a highly cost-effective choice with massive threat intel if you're already deeply invested in the Microsoft 365 E5 ecosystem, though it can be a bit weaker on Mac and Linux. Sophos really shines with its managed detection services and simple management. And Palo Alto Cortex? A total powerhouse if you already use their network and cloud stack.
And we definitely need to mention a few other major players to round out the field. Trend Micro offers really broad coverage at a competitive price point. CyberReason has this unique, operation-centric approach to visualization, and Carbon Black remains super strong for virtualized environments. I will say, though, you should carefully monitor the business stability and future product roadmaps for those last 2 vendors before locking into a multi-year commitment.
Okay, Section 4, selection and evaluation criteria. Asking the right questions. Because knowing the players is only half the battle, right? Next, we need to establish exactly how to evaluate them for your specific environment so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Listen, going forward, this is absolutely the most important question you can ask any vendor. You have to press them on how their agent interacts with the kernel. You need to know their staged rollout capabilities, their rollback mechanisms, and their internal testing procedures before an update ever touches your machines. Seriously, do not accept vague answers here. And to avoid making a rushed decision based purely on panic, you really should follow a pragmatic, 4-phase evaluation process. First, scope your constraints. Second, shortlist your top leaders. Third, run a real 30 to 60-day pilot, and I mean with actual workloads, not just some controlled lab test. And finally, negotiate. And don't just negotiate on price. Negotiate clear exit clauses.
That brings us to Section 5, the real security lesson, Defense in Depth. Because here is the narrative twist of this entire explainer. Simply swapping out vendors is not a silver bullet.
The crucial point we have to remember is that any software running at the kernel level can crash your systems. Actually, a fascinating piece of context from the source material. Back in April 2010, McAfee pushed a faulty update that caused an infinite reboot loop on Windows XP machines worldwide. So this is an industry-wide architectural reality. It's not a single vendor anomaly.
You know, the organizations that survived July 2024 completely unscathed? They didn't just have lucky software. They relied on structural resilience. They used network segmentation to limit the blast radius. They used strict security hardening and least privileged access. And most importantly, they utilized staged update policies. They actually tested updates in a staging group before just pushing them blindly into the wider production environment.
All right, Section 6, planning a safe migration, executing the switch. If, after evaluating all the risks and options, you do decide to migrate your platform, you have to execute the transition flawlessly to avoid some really dangerous security gaps.
You should absolutely follow a clear, phased timeline. Run the new agent in parallel in a monitor-only mode first. Then, migrate your non-critical systems, followed by production. Crucially, and people forget this one all the time, Phase 4, preserve your historical investigation data before you turn the old system off. Finally, budget the actual time it takes to rebuild your centralized logging and automated response integrations, like your SIEM.
Take a quick second to see where you currently sit on this maturity ladder, moving from traditional AV to EDR and then up to XDR, extended detection and response, that adds incredible visibility. But keep in mind, moving all the way up to a managed XDR or MDR option might actually be your best bet if you lack a 24/7 internal security operations team. Because at the end of the day, never forget that the human element is paramount. This statement rings so true. A mediocre EDR operated by a skilled team will outperform a world-class EDR that nobody monitors. The most expensive detection tool in the world is totally meaningless if alerts are triggering on a dashboard at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and no one is there to investigate.
So, as you evaluate these alternatives for 2026, I want you to ask yourself this final question. Are you just swapping one logo on a dashboard for another, or are you actually taking steps to harden your environment so that no single faulty update can take your business offline ever again? Definitely something to think about as you plan your next move in endpoint security.